Hi, I'm sitting here with my friend Joe Caro, who is one of the guitarists with Paul Shaffer on February 17th at 7:30 at Maryland Hall. And I am just so happy to be hanging out with Joe, and I can't wait till you're in town. Joe, welcome. Welcome to Annapolis.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. I'm sure it's going to be a great time, and I think it'll be a great show, and we'll all have a great, fun time together because this crew seems to always have that every time we get together.
Yeah, we really do. I was just looking at that picture that we all took at Long Beach, and the thing that's in that picture that you have to remember is that was taken at somewhere around 2:30 in the morning because we were so busy talking that we didn't want to call it a day and go to the airport. So
Yeah, it's a fun group, and I've known some of these guys for years and years, and especially with the music business being as fragmented as it is, it's fun to get together with people that you love and love to play with.
yeah, absolutely. So well, speaking of people that you know and you've known for years, tell me how you got to know Paul, and then we'll come into this concert.
So, I think we kind of came to New York around the same time.
Right.
I was around 19 and just starting to break into the studio business, and I believe it was right around the time that Paul came from Toronto to New York, and he was kind of getting involved in the early days of Saturday Night Live.
Right.
And I don't remember the specific recording, but we must have worked together in a couple of sessions. And my first real memory is on a Saturday, I'm walking around Washington Square Park in the Village. And Washington Square Park in the Village on a Saturday back in those days was filled with everything from people, playing music with a little tin cup for tips to hippies running around, to, street people, to whatever. It was kind of all packed with this mishmash of what is lower New York City, the East Village.
Right.
And as I'm walking around, I bump into Paul Shaffer, who I knew just, recently. And at the time, we spent the afternoon together, and he was living in a hotel down there at the end of Park Avenue, was it? I forget which one it was, but he actually hadn't permanently settled in New York yet. And we hung out the whole day, and that was pretty much how we locked in as friends. And then from then on, I would see him on and off on recording sessions. We kept in touch over the years, and then when he first started with Letterman NBC, my next door neighbor, who was a guitar player, was his main guitar player. And then whenever he needed a second guitar player, he called me. So
Right.
I would end up doing from the early days of the Letterman show with him at NBC. If he needed a second guitar player or an acoustic guitar or something like that, I would be the go-to guy. And, from then on, we've continuously worked together. I've done 3 solo albums, of which four of which Paul has played on 2 of them.
Wow.
And I always love the fact that no matter how big a name Paul has become, every time I pick up the phone and say, I got this record, there's not a lot of money in it, would you come play? He's like, tell me where and when, I'll be there. And,
Yeah, he does this. He did the same thing with me with this show down here in Annapolis. I said,
for me, I love now that the music business has become so fragmented and
right.
there's not as much money in it. You really see who did it for the love and
Yeah.
who still has the garage band mentality
Yeah.
of, if it's a lot of fun and a little bit of money, I'll do it. If it's a lot of money and a little bit of fun, I'll do it. But the fun element has to be in
Yeah.
there for most guys. And Paul is one of those guys who still enjoys it. He still loves doing it. And if you pick up the phone and say, hey, this is going to be fun, will you come down? He's there
Yeah.
in a flash.
Yeah, he absolutely. I sort of was telling somebody the other day, I said, Paul, I really need to do like a fundraising concert down here in Annapolis. I said, would you be willing to come down here? I didn't even finish the sentence. And he said, absolutely. What date are you thinking about? And, just a great guy. And as you said, he's doing it for the love. I mean, we're all,
and I'll say this, every record that he's played on for me, which is two of them basically, he's brought his A game, and not only his musicianship, but his whole conceptual thing, which I always think about Paul. The Letterman thing that he did was the most perfect pairing of a person, a musician, and a job that I've ever seen. Because Paul is a musician first, but a musicologist second.
Oh, yeah.
And when it comes to all the people that he worked with, he not only knows what they do or what their music is about, but he's had an affinity for it for years
Right.
and years, in most cases. And I've worked with him. We've done shows for, politicians and this and that,
Right.
where I've worked with him from anybody from the Eagles to Sheryl Crow to Lenny Kravitz to John Bon Jovi to a thing he did for the guy from the Dave Clark Five. He did a benefit for him with all the British invasion people. And all of those different genres was something that not only Paul learned to play, but Paul knew from either his childhood or from studying that music for years and years. So his genre, it's just a big plethora of everything that he's known. And when he plays it, he play even to the point of where there are times where he's given me an assignment and said, we got to learn this tune. I've listened to the record from the 60s to learn parts that were so, deep down inside, just because I know who he is.
Right.
That at times I've said to him, well, how about this part? And he's kind of said, well, I never even heard that one. I don't know how deep you're getting into this. But, it's always a challenge. And he expects the best from people.
Yeah.
And accepts no less from people. And at the same time, he brings his A game all the time. So there's no excuses.
All the time. You were talking about finding parts that were deep in there. We were one of the songs we do on this show is the Righteous Brothers, Just Once in My Life. And he was, of course, when you're dealing with Phil Spector, you're always dealing with so many things that are just buried in that texture. But he called me up one day and said, he said, I heard this in here. And it's not in the arrangement, I don't think. He said, can you check? And I looked and I said, it's not. And he said, well, put your headphones on. And by God, it was in there, But if you just listen like in the room, his mind is so, Felicia and I were talking the other day and she said, he is so meticulous. And he really is. I mean, he just, and I think, what you said earlier is, it's his love. She described him as a fan of the music.
Yeah.
Just play it. He's a fan. And I think that goes along with the love. So I think that's really true. So.
Well, on the other side of the coin is when you work with Paul, you got to bring your A game, because if you play one wrong note in the part, his eyes go up to see who was that, who did it. So his ears are just as
into
everything also.
He knows. He knows.
Yeah.
Well, and we have and again, I think we all have this love, not just for the music, but for him. And for us, it's like, how awesome is it to get to work with somebody like that and then do it together, I mean, I've gotten to meet you guys and hang out with you guys over the years. And this is, it's fun. So is there anything in particular that you especially like about doing this concert? Is there anything that you sort of think about?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, I played with Paul in various situations with small rhythm sections, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not sure whether it was the catalyst for this, but at one time years ago, I had my own band that used to play at a club in New York every Tuesday night called the Met Band. Yeah. We had a show at a place in Connecticut at a theater booked, and I had another friend of mine as a special guest. Turned out he had to go in the hospital, and I thought, who could I get that would bring some life to this and do something different? And I thought of Paul. So I called him up, and of course he said, yeah, no problem. I'll be there in a flash. And we picked 3 or 4 songs of his. This was a small ensemble with a couple of horns and a rhythm section. And he, in between the songs that he picked for himself, he talked about different scenarios with the artists, which he basically worked with on the show. One of the stories he told was about James Brown being on the show and bringing his own hair salon with one of those old style,
Oh yeah.
almost like what they had on Saturday Night Live with the cone heads, and Paul talking to him. And in between his songs, he told these stories. And I don't know if that's what resonated with him, but I said, this is a great show because people not only like hearing the music that you do or whatever, you choose, but they love hearing these little inside stories. And this whole show that he does now with you and with us, that's basically what it is. It's the life and times of Paul Shaffer and how each one of these pieces of music have affected him and how he found them and learned them from the time he was a kid playing the piano by himself in Thunder Bay. So I think it's not only just come hear this music, it's come hear the Paul Shaffer story and how it fits in to all of these great songs that, by the way, you would never hear live in a million years. I mean, who does Barry White stuff live?
Oh my God, I know.
Who does A Day in the Life live? Nobody.
Right.
So when I explain to my friends about this show, that's what I tell them. It's an opportunity to hear music that you've heard on the radio for years that you never heard live because nobody's ever put, I don't even know when the Righteous Brothers did these songs. If they ever did it with an orchestra, they probably did it with a backing track.
Yeah, it was all backing tracks. Yeah.
So it's a real unique experience to hear him speak about these songs and the relationship he has with them, even to the point where you talk about Phil Spector. I mean, Paul knew Phil Spector sought him out because he was such a fan of this music.
Yeah. I told somebody.
And because he had the connections from the Letterman show and some of these people would be on the show, he had the ability to make friends with them, pick their brains and ask them, how did you do this? And why did you do that?
Right.
So I think it's a unique musical experience for people to come and hear something that they would really never hear.
Yeah. I told somebody, we're going to do this a couple weeks later after we do it here in Annapolis, in Toledo, Ohio, which is where I did my undergraduate school. And when I was talking to the people at the theater, I said, you should really get this, you should really get Paul to come next season. And we were talking about it. They said, well, give me one line that you can say about this show. And I said, there is nothing like this out there at all, period. This unique. Show, this is unique. And I said, and here's the example I gave was I was sitting with Paul and we were talking about the opening of the show. And, we do the opening of Love's Theme, the Barry White. And then we hold that A before we bum, bum, bum. And we just do that. And one of the things that Paul and I were talking about was a song that's 2 songs later, the Gene Page, All Our Dreams Are Coming True. And I remember saying, well, so where did you get, how did you get like the Gene Page thing? He said, well, that album, and he starts going into the album. He said, and oh, by the way, that album was produced by Barry White and Barry's on half of the tracks. And I mean, it was like his encyclopedic knowledge.
Yeah.
And then that took us over to another arranger who's on the program. So, I mean, it's one of those things. And what was interesting, you remember we were in Vancouver and after the concert, there were people standing in front of the stage who were hoping that some of us would come out. And I went out to get something I left on my stand. And they wanted to talk about some of the stuff that Paul had mentioned during the concert. That never happens. I mean, people, so it's incredible. So,
well, my mind is going back to when we did that show in the first show in Connecticut there. There were times where I called Paul at like 1 o'clock in the morning because I was having a discussion about who sang this song or this record. And he'd pick up the phone and immediately know it. And then at that Connecticut show, in the parking lot before he's going back home, we're trying to figure out who played the bass on Van Morrison's Brown Eyed Girls.
Right.
And this is at 1 o'clock in the morning after the show. Everybody's gone and we're going, who would do that? And I remembered a good friend of mine, Al Gorgoni, played acoustic guitar on that record because there's no names on the jacket.
Right.
So Paul and I sat there. Well, at 1 o'clock in the morning, I called Al, woke him out of bed to ask him who the bass player on Brown Eyed Girl was. And he said Eric Gale, who's not even a bass player.
Right.
But because he knew he was at the session, he knew everything that happened. So that's how deep.
Right.
I mean, I go pretty deep into that stuff, into wanting to know who did what. And Paul obviously goes deeper than I do.
Yeah. Well, and this is what makes it fun. And again, the other part of this is, you know, you, Felicia, Clint, Frankie, Valerie, you know, we all just have, it's like going to summer camp for musician adults, you know, it's like fun.
It's an encyclopedia of music.
Yeah. And we just have a great time. So,
some of which some people like to know and some don't.
You know what? But I swear to God, I've never seen people lined up at the foot of the stage to find out, to get more information about something after a concert, you know? You know, and the stage door in Vancouver, that stage door, they were there too. I mean, it was, you know, Winnipeg, the weather was so bad that, you know, it was flooding. So nobody stayed out there, but
right.
Well, listen, man, I can't wait to see you. I'll see you in a month, I guess. And
okay.
In the meantime, Joe Caro, fabulous guitarist, and I can't wait for our audience to meet you and for you to meet them. And thank you, man.
Looking forward to it. I'll see you soon, Ernie.
I'll see you soon. Be well.
Okay. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.